ES Audio.
Loads of footballers talk about living for the roar of the crowd. The business equivalent might be scoring a game-changing deal, maybe even doing it again and again. The shareholders are happy, your client's happy, everybody's happy, right?
It didn't matter what I felt about my training session, what I thought about my performance in a game. It only mattered what the coach thought, or the manager, or the fans. It led into almost 2 decades of my value and self-esteem being heavily anchored in external validation.
Clarke Carlisle is a former Premier League footballer who now works with companies across the UK to improve mental health well-being in the workplace. He and his wife Carrie will be appearing at the upcoming watercolour exhibition and conference around office culture. It follows his own long battle with depression that affected his work, his life, and his family.
I was just about masking my anxiety at that point, and I had to have a GP say to me, Clarke dragged me to the GP, and the GP said, this isn't your first rodeo if you're already here, and then this happens and you can't function. When this happened to us, Clarke's illness happened to us, I could no longer mask my symptoms. I could no longer pretend I wasn't anxious.
I'm David Marsland from the Evening Standard. Now, Clarke and Carrie make a great team. There's a lot of laughter in this episode, but we are going to be talking about some very difficult issues, including feelings around suicide. We're also going to be getting mental health advice, hearing about help, and lots of success stories. There is a lot going on. So where do we start? Clarke, let's start with you.
Do you hear that, baby? Let's start with me.
Start with Clarke, you'll finish with Clarke, I absolutely guarantee you. Get comfy.
Not that it's all about me, but let's start with me.
Start with your childhood.
Yeah, Carrie, we'll do 2 minutes with Clarke and then the rest will be with you. But I'm just helping his ego a bit. Because you've had quite a journey with your mental health, and as an adult, you learned and how to deal with it. But it was as a child that you think you first noticed you may have been having mental health issues.
Definitely, yeah. But it's not that the adverse mental health started in childhood. But what I have come to understand, predominantly through therapy, is a lot of my emotional responses and my coping behaviours were formed in my childhood, largely in fear of admonishment or punishment from my parents, especially my old man. You got to think, grew up in the 70s and 80s. Corporal punishment was the order of the day. It wasn't even thought about. So my dad was a big 6'5" imposing black man, and the fear that he physically put in us as children and the fear of punishment by him, it caused a lot of very insular responses. It caused a lot of secrecy within how I'm feeling or the actions that I was undertaking. Not only that, it kind of ties in, David, with the beliefs and values of that time about what it was to be a man. We'd probably call it archaic now, but I'll go with traditional. You have your back straight, your head down, you don't show any signs of weakness, and you definitely don't display any of those negative emotions. So, what I've realize now is that a lot of my emotional suppression and a lot of my avoidance behaviors, they were formed as a child. But there's nothing wrong with that. We all do that. The reason where it becomes impactful and consequential is when you're still using those same emotional responses and coping mechanisms as a 35-year-old man.
That kind of experience with, let's call it a father figure, actually, because I'm thinking about going into football when you're a young man. I mean, that's a hard world, isn't it? Lots of discipline, lots of training, probably quite a bit of shouting. You must have gone through exactly the same thing as a young footballer.
It's a hard world, but actually I fit into it perfectly because it gave me very clear boundaries and parameters. You know, being a guy of mixed heritage in a predominantly white, well, it was like 99% white council estate and then a 99% white school. There was a lot of othering. There was a lot of isolation. There was a lot of me trying to mold myself to fit in to various groups. Because of that, that kind of developed this people-pleasing behavior. I didn't do things because I wanted to do them. I did them because I thought you wanted me to do them. In doing so, you would accept me. So when I go into football, you know, the very strict parameters about what to do, how to do it, when to do it, that suited me down to the ground, because I really didn't have an identity or a mode of thinking of my own. The flip side to that is that it actually perpetuated that people pleasing within me, because it didn't matter what I felt about my training session, what I thought about my performance in a game. It only mattered what the coach thought, or the manager, or the fans. It led into almost 2 decades of my value and self-esteem being heavily anchored in external validation. And when that happens, you're subject to the whims and fancies of everyone else. And the direct impact on me is that my emotional and psychological state and well-being, you know, it fluctuated dramatically from hour to hour, never mind day to day.
Carrie, at home, how did those kind of mood swings, that fluctuation, how is that affecting things in the house?
I met Clarke after he retired. I guess but still had the same mentality. So great question. But we got into trouble early on because I wouldn't fulfill a cycle of behavior that we didn't know was a cycle of behavior. So he would always try and redeem himself. And I'd be like, there's no need. Like, we didn't know that. We learned that way after when he got cognitive and analytical therapy. But I'd be like, there's literally no need. Like, you're grand as you are. Crack on. Like, I don't do anything. I don't want stuff or money or things or, you know, props. None of it interested me. I just liked him. He was great. He was like my kind of weird, met his kind of weird, and then we just got together and were weird for a lot, weren't we? So he'd be like, in his head, he'd have this whole cycle of behavior going on, and I just wouldn't notice. I'd be like, la 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 la, just living his best life. But that got us in trouble. It seems like that's nice, like that's a nice idea. But when your whole life has been extreme highs and lows, and I win or I lose, not me, by the way. In fact, we did a questionnaire one time, right? And Clarke was 99% competitive, and I'm 1% competitive. So together we're 100%. But he'd be like, yeah, high, low, win, lose. And then there's me just average. I don't get it. Like, I just don't get it. And when he couldn't fulfill that cycle, it actually had a pretty dangerous knock-on effect for him, because he was free-falling. He didn't know what to do. I'm not saying that it completely added to suicide attempts, but it was something he was so uncomfortable with, because his entire life, from childhood through being an athlete, every relationship he'd ever had in any form was, I'm going to mess up and redeem myself. I'm going to win or I'm going to lose. And you just couldn't do that with me. But he stuck it. Bless him. He didn't go, well, this isn't working for me. It's a weird dynamic. I can't remember what the question was.
it was how did my swings play at home? And you've answered it perfectly, you know, because Carrie's right. I was heavily entrenched.
Just Carrie's right will do.
Yeah, I'll stop right there. And that was the end of the show.
I was heavily entrenched in that polemic existence. Everything was win or lose, success or fail. You know, middle ground, okay, all right. That was anathema to me. It was a really uncomfortable place. I had to be achieving or I had to be losing so that I could then redeem myself and achieve. So when we factor that into our relationship, you know, if I did something that I thought was a little bit naughty, you know, maybe I played a game of poker or I had a night out, I would come home and seek kind of admonishment from Carrie, because then that gave me a low point from which then I could redeem myself. But she just didn't care.
No, that's not true. That's actually not true. It's not that I didn't care. It's just that we had this foundation of unconditional love and support from day one. Like, we fostered it, we really took care of it. And then he'd be like, oh, I must act out this old behavior. And I'd be like, no, well, you can't. But I didn't tell him that I loved him unconditionally till he tried to kill himself and was in psychiatric hospital. Top tip, don't wait that long. Like, do it before at some point. If you don't tell the people in your life you love them unconditionally, they don't know. So I would show him, because that's what I wasn't brought up around people telling me they love me all the time. I do tell Clarke, we do tell our kids, but he didn't know, like, there's nothing you can do to make me go away. Plus the stuff he was doing wasn't even terrible. Like it was literally, he would just not be 100% best boyfriend in the world, rah, 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 which is what he was, I guess, used to. So it ended up being helpful long-term, but not great at first, did it? And it took 3 weeks in psych hospital and 2 life attempts on his life to have an expert say to us, oh, hey, guess what? This is what he does. This is what you do, which is why you should go to counselling together.
Yes.
Go to counselling together, get an expert, and go to therapy separately.
Let's go to the ads. And while they're on, have a look at watercoolerevent.com, where you'll find all the speakers and events taking place at the XL London on 25th and 26th of April. Tickets are free. That's watercoolerevent.com. We're back after these. Welcome back. This section of How to Be a CEO contains a discussion about the feelings around suicide. Clarke, let's talk about that time when you did go into hospital, when you needed that psychiatric treatment. I mean, it sounds like Carrie was doing everything she possibly could to keep you on an equilibrium. How did you end up so low in those circumstances?
What a really good question. You know, if I'm not paying a direct attention to my well-being and my psychological, emotional state, if I'm not sharing those feelings of emotion that take me to overwhelm, which, you know, from my history have always been feelings of either sadness when I want to cry, because crying wasn't accepted in my home as a child, fear and anxiety. Oh, and anger as well. All of my life, I've been petrified of my own anger. And again, you know, that's born out of the interactions of how I saw anger displayed in my childhood. I didn't want that to manifest in my life. So, you know, if I'm not sharing and managing those emotions, then I suppress them to the point of overwhelm. So it doesn't matter what Carrie does for me in that process. It doesn't matter what services are available to me. It doesn't matter how much money I've got in my bank or how good my job is. You know, everything external doesn't matter if I'm not engaging with the process of managing, you know, my state and my situation. And it was something that I didn't know how to do, David. I'd never been taught it. You know, everything in my life had always been about either suppression or avoidance. You know, we get to 2017, I get that low because if I am sharing, I'm not sharing 100% honestly. And I'm probably only sharing with Carrie at that point in my life. And we're still in a young relationship. You know, I still want Carrie to feel that, you know, everything's all right. I still have that perception that if I'm upset, then it will reflect on our relationship and Carrie will think that something's wrong with her or with us when it's not. So, you know, I'm bottling all that inside.
If unconditional love and support could fix mental health issues, nobody would have any, because we've all got hopefully at least one person. So it doesn't matter how stable your home life is, doesn't matter. Stabilization is key after you've been diagnosed. Stabilization is key once you know what you're working with, but unconditional love can't fix an actual medical problem. Mental health issues, a brain is part of the body. So once Clarke got the correct diagnosis, which you didn't get until you were 37, you could have tried to stay as well as you liked. I'm not saying he did try everything. He absolutely didn't. He tried 2 things quite badly. But until you honestly get the correct diagnosis, the right medication, the right level of medication, the right therapy for you, then come home, then do the whole stabilization, telling on myself, admitting 100%. You couldn't have stopped what happened. It was at that stage, it was completely inevitable. He couldn't have done anything, nor could I, but absolutely we could have done everything once there was the right medical intervention.
And Carrie, how is your mental health?
It's I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm quite highly strung. So I had never had therapy until Clarke tried to kill himself when I was pregnant, and the NHS throws everything at you when you've just had a baby or when you are pregnant, quite rightly, because of postnatal depression and whatnot. I have a brother with a mental illness, so they also were keeping their eye out anyway, just in case. And so I got therapy very quickly on the NHS. How wonderful. And then from there, I realised, wow, therapy is like having a personal organizer, but for your thoughts rather than your wardrobe. And it was great to talk, not just about me and our trauma, because Clarke didn't put me through anything. What we went through affected us both. And it turned out I was just about masking my anxiety at that point, and I had to have a GP say to me, Clarke dragged me to the GP, and the GP said, this isn't your first rodeo if you're already here, and then this happens and you can't function. When this happened to us, Clarke's illness happened to us, I could no longer mask my symptoms. I could no longer pretend I wasn't anxious. So wonderfully, I went on anti-anxiety meds for 6 months and started talking therapy. Hindsight's 2020, but could Clarke have had the same intervention 20 years ago when the world was a different place? Would it have gotten to the depths that he got to? Probably not. We'll never know. So how is my mental health? It's up and down. I'm usually very, very up, sometimes too up with anxiety, but we're on different scales and we support each other. It's not about Clarke having an illness and me being the carer. It's absolutely 50-50, like in all relationships.
I really like that question, because I think people
Never ever ask me that.
But I think it's really important, because both of you went through this, and I just figured there had to be some kind of an effect on Carrie herself, having gone through what would be really traumatic.
Definitely.
And Clarke is definitely the more stable one in this relationship. Absolutely. At first people go, really? And then they hear me talk and go, oh yeah, I get it. So I'm very, up, down, whereas Clarke's had this, for all he was by nature up, down, due to trauma and whatnot, and just the nature of being an athlete, he's actually made a very slow upward trajectory in his wellness. He's very stable by nature. He's very placid by nature. And we're just uncovering all that, really. So I'm definitely the more, I'm not going to say volatile, but I'm definitely the more, my mood swings are way more up and down than his are, because I'm just very anxious by nature, I think.
I think there's a common misconception around the term wellness, to be honest, David, because I think, that there's a societal perception that when we talk about wellness, we're talking about happiness. And if you say, are you well now? People think you're constantly up here and feeling great, and like the Speakmans, life's great, all that. That's not life. That's not reality. I am the most well that I've ever been in my life. That still doesn't protect me, from having low days of sadness, life impacting me. What being well means, it means that none of those deviations, especially in the lower ebb, none of them are dangerous. It means I'm managing them and processing them, in the right way at the right time, so that I do maintain, a pretty level trajectory on the course of my life. But I really rail against that pursuit of happiness, because happiness is a transient emotion. And if you're going to pursue that constantly, then you're setting yourself up for large tranches of failure, or being less than, or being lower than. My perception and my approach in life is to strive for contentment. Carrie really railed against this when I first mentioned it.
Like you're settling. Oh, I'm content. Oh, that's average. No. I'm so glad you're content with me.
To have contentment doesn't mean you're settling for
peace.
You can have contentment and still strive and aspire. But to have contentment, in my understanding, is to be grateful for all that you have. And that's what I strive for in my circumstances, whether emotionally I'm up or down, I strive to be grateful for what I have in my present.
Having been through all of that, both of you have now decided to talk about it. You're doing interviews like this one. You do lots of corporate occasions, speeches. And having done that and then starting to meet with companies and business people, have you realized there's actually an issue here, there's a problem here, and there is help that can be given?
100%, you know, and I don't think we were under any illusions that there was going to be a problem, especially, you know, within the workplace sector, where the vast majority of people are going to be putting on their work face, you know, but trying to embody that professional persona when they go to work, and masking whatever symptoms they've got, you know, and hiding from the fact of the reality of what's going on in behind closed doors. I don't think we were under any illusion that there were going to be problems there. But what I think surprised us was the very particular and repetitive nature of what the problems were
within each sector.
Across the workplaces and within each sector. And we could probably pinpoint maybe 3 or 4 things that are commonplace across virtually every workplace, unless you have someone on a board or executive level who has a lived experience of adverse mental health, and then the culture changes.
Athletes talk very well to high performing individuals. They do. So of course we're sectors where people are in high performance, high impact, high stress environments. There's always going to be that correlation. But I think what we realized, what our passion is as well, is that we love to make people aware of the support networks they've already got. Like, genuinely, your work pay for this. They pay for it. It's yours. They don't care if you don't use it, then why do it? And another thing that really we're passionate about is, if you do go on sick leave, please don't just sit at home. That within any sector, we've had this problem of, you know, people, they finally admit something's not working. Usually, like me, when they couldn't mask it anymore, when they literally could not function and pretend anymore. We really want to get people to the point where they don't go on the sick and admit that they're ill just to sit at home. We want them to use everything. And a lot of companies have absolutely incredible resources. They really, really do. We just want to highlight them and say, guess what? We use them too. And they work really well, and they might even be there for your family, because guess what? You know, what the pandemic did for us really is, we'd never really done virtual talks before that. We thought it had to be face to face, didn't we? What really worked for us is, we didn't just say to people, right, you watch this talk. Oh, you're at home. Guess what? Get your flatmates, get your husband, get your wife, get your children over 18, because it starts with we. You know, the wellness has we in it, doesn't it? So we're really passionate about, take everyone with you. Don't just take bits of our talk that are a bit sanitized, that you're ready to talk about. The good, the bad, the ugly, share it together, because you're all getting well together. And the EAPs pick up on it.
They do, you know, it's ubiquitous to the workplace. Resources are there, but people are reluctant to engage with them. You know, the dynamic that we want to change is not that people access the support services or their EAP because they're in crisis or because they need support. We think that it should be mandated that employees are expected to check in with these support services 3 times a year, and it's part of their annual appraisal, you know, so that there is no external perception that you're in trouble or less than or in need or lacking. You know, it's like your annual health checkup at the GP.
Health,
you know,
and safety training at work.
Exactly. We do this so that we're proactive and intervening in potential adverse mental health. But further than that, once you do start to engage with these services, what we found is that it's more than just wellness. This is actually underpinning my capability as an adult. You know, once you are well, the continuing therapy, we think it's CPD, don't we? You know, the amount of insight and life application that we get from exploring our thought processes and our responses, it actually makes me, I know this, more capable as an adult, and then I can fulfill my roles.
Yeah, we're a little bit behind the times in Britain, I think. I think Americans haven't nailed, to be honest. They know that if you're successful, then you get therapy or you get life coaching or what have you. And we just, you know, the more people that just stand up like us and go, hey, guess what? I know that we went public and told everyone, but we still choose to do this every day. This is our luxury item. You know, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't whatever. I do. Yeah, but your therapist is good in mine. I don't. Like, I like shoes and I like handbags, but this is my luxury item, and I choose to evolve, and I choose how I feel. I wake up in the morning and I choose how I feel. We're from different angles, we have different beliefs, and we're still both well, so it's for everyone.
That was Clarke and Carrie Carlisle. If you've been affected by the topics talked about in this episode, help is available. Go to samaritans.org or call 116 123. How to Be a CEO is back on Monday morning. In the meantime, you can get daily news, interviews and analysis at standard.co.uk/business.